Good morning again. I'd like to thank you once again. I know I previously thanked you for being potential jurors and the fact that you are in fact jurors. And now I'd like to take the opportunity to thank you again for doing exactly what it is that we knew you would do. You were selected because myself and other counsel felt that you were the best that there was in order to sit there and listen throughout the course of this trial and pay attention to everything going on in the courtroom. I know I pay attention, I know the judge pays attention, I know they do. And you've done exactly as it is that we thought you would do, and you paid attention throughout all the testimony as well as everything else going on in the course of this trial. And thank you very much. Once again, we literally cannot do this without you. You are a vital part of the criminal justice system. That being said, closing arguments. As the judge says, I get to talk to you twice. I talked to you the first time, and then Mr. Way will come up and speak with you, or Mr. Padavano, and I will come back and get to address you one last time. The way I like to structure this a little bit, just to give you a little bit of guideline, is I want to go over the elements of the crime and the jury instructions as the judge just read to you, okay? So let's start off with what we know. We know on December 16th, 2000, Jerry Michael Williams, Mike Williams, was murdered. It was initially classified as a missing person case, the shoddy homicide investigation, because it was not a homicide investigation. But we know now that man murdered him. Brian Winchester. We know that everybody involved here are longtime friends. Brian, Denise, Kathy Thomas, Mike, all longtime friends, went to North Florida Christian School together, went to Florida State University together. This started out as a homicide missing person case, ended up being a homicide investigation. Brian Winchester killed Mike Williams. Brian Winchester was in love with Denise Williams. Long time. We know that Brian and Denise actually got married on December 3rd, 2015. 13 days from the anniversary, the 5th anniversary of the murder. We know at the time that he died that Mike Williams had multiple life insurance policies. $250,000, $500,000, and $1 million. All of which Denise Williams was the sole beneficiary of. We know that final one, that $1 million policy, was drafted by Brian Winchester the summer before he murdered Mike Williams. That's what we know. That's what we knew coming in here. The question you had is, how does she fit in the picture? How does she fit into the murder, the conspiracy for murder, and helping him after the murder? As I said, to go through elements, I want to start off on the backside because I think that puts everything in a little bit more perspective. Accessory after the fact. The elements the judge has read to you, that a murder was committed by Brian Winchester, no question. After the murder was committed, Denise Williams maintained, assisted, aided, or attempted to aid him. And at the time, she knew he had done it, and she did so with intent for him to avoid arrest, trial, or punishment. Remember Dr. Mnuchin. Very brief witness, but a very important one. Because one of the things the defense alluded to during the opening statements is that this is, and of course they're probably going to hear shortly, is that this was all something that Brian Winchester did and came up with to get revenge on Denise for turning him in. Dr. Mnuchin says otherwise. Brian Winchester goes and talks to Dr. Mnuchin prior to the arrest. And what does he tell him? He says, I'm worried that Denise is going to go to law enforcement and that she's going to tell him about a murder that happened and what she knows many years ago, the murder of Mike Williams. Prior to the arrest. accessory after the fact. After the arrest, within the week of Denise going and talking to law enforcement and being interviewed by Florida Department of Law Enforcement and talked to about the murder of Mike Williams, she calls her good friend Kathy Thomas and says, tell Marcus to tell Brian I didn't say anything. Marcus, if you don't remember, is Brian's dad. Kathy Thomas came, she testified to you, and told you that's what happened. But you don't have to take her word for it.
Well, I mean, I know that you know something, Denise, because whenever I was going out to see Marcus, you're like, tell Marcus to tell Brian I'm not talking.
Yeah.
And I knew what that meant.
So we know that she has knowledge of the homicide because Brian has told Dr. Mnookin already. And now she's sending a message to Brian to say, let him know that she didn't say anything. And you go back and you think about the Brian Winchester's testimony, and they had a pact, an agreement that nobody would say anything to another person. Nobody would say anything to law enforcement. And that's what she was saying. She was continuing that pact and letting him know that she didn't say anything to law enforcement on that day. And she takes it one step further, and she makes sure that he knows this. So that way he doesn't then turn around and confess and dime her out in accord with the agreement they have. That right there, ladies and gentlemen, meets all the elements of accessory after the fact. Knew the murder was committed, aided, maintained, assisted, abetted, attempted to aid them, knew he had done it, and was the intent to avoid arrest, trial, and punishment. Accessory after the fact, all the elements have been proven by the state. So let's turn to elements of conspiracy. Now, the reason I went with the accessory after the fact first is because of that statement. Because of the statements of Dr. Mnookin. Because now with conspiracy, a lot of this you're going to have to rely upon Brian Winchester's testimony. No question about it. But when you're relying on Brian Winchester's testimony, take it in light of the fact of what you heard from Dr. Mnookin, from Kathy Thomas. And as the jury instruction tells you, does the testimony, one of the things you have to do in weighing the evidence is figure out whether the testimony of a witness, no matter who it is, does it comport with the other evidence and other testimony from other witnesses. So when you have Kathy Thomas, Dr. Mnookin telling you what they told you, it changes things a little bit when you're paying attention to Brian's testimony. It puts it in more context. So when you go back and you listen and you think about the elements of conspiracy, Denise Williams intended that Mike Williams be killed. In order to do so, she agreed with or conspired with Brian Winchester to kill Mike Williams. It is a defense, and she decided not to carry out the homicide and persuade him not stopping it. But it is not complete and voluntary where the crime wasn't committed because of an unanticipated difficulty or decision to postpone the crime to another time. As I said, this all relies upon Brian Winchester's testimony, and you have to do that evaluation we just talked about. So let's talk about Brian Winchester's testimony. Brian Winchester tells you this affair actually started 3 years prior, in 1997, at a concert at Floyd's off Tennessee Street. Been going on for 3 years. Well, let's take a look at how the other elements and other testimony, how that stacks up. Lindsay Lockhart. Different concert, but another concert at Floyd's Music Hall. she's there with her friends, and actually Mike's there as well. And she sees Brian Winchester and Denise acting in a manner that is not just friendly, it's above friendly, as if they were dating. Arms around each other, Brian standing behind her, 3 years prior to Mike's death, just like Brian said. And Joe Safford, there at the concert as well, sees the same thing. 3 years prior to Mike's death. She's even a little bit farther. She's there when Denise is 7 months pregnant. 2 years prior to Mike's death. And her and Brian are flirting or whatever, hanging out and go out drinking. And what happens? Denise changes the way she's acting toward him. Is it something glaring? No. Keep in mind, affairs are secretive by nature. Conspiracies are secretive by nature. But she changes the way she's acting towards her. Why? Maybe a little jealous that Miss Stafford was able to go out and have drinks with him and she wasn't? Kathy Thomas got a movie ticket where they had gone out together. Found the Meridian necklace. Had suspicions of them dating. The recording. She always knew that they were in love with each other. You've got the tickets that Brian kept as momentum. Now keep in mind that what he says is, yes, this affair started 3 years prior, but also even after Mike's death, they maintained secrecy until about 2003, 2004. One of those tickets from 1998. More from 2001, 2002, before they came out. They were kept because those are things that they did together and dates they went on to concerts. The letter from Denise. The question about whether or not Brian tried to get back together with Kathy. There's a letter from Denise at that time period in which you heard a portion of it. You have it in evidence if you want to take a look at it. But in that, she talks about her love. She professes her love for her. How she's going to miss him. That didn't happen overnight. Keep in mind, he's still married to Kathy at that time. That letter confirmed that this is an ongoing relationship between Brian Winchester and Denise Williams. It's from her handwriting, and it's in her name signed, "Love You." And at one point, she says, "I love you more than ever." You don't love someone more than ever if you didn't love them before. Oops. And then finally, the truck of the church. Joni Chase, Tallahassee police officer. Nobody really thinks anything of it at the time. Obviously, it takes a different light in this situation. But remember what Brian Winchester said. He would park at different churches, one of which was the Grace Lutheran Church off of Miccosukee and Capitol Circle. Right across from the CVS area, kind of over there by the dealerships. Sergeant Joni Chase, on patrol, back in 1999, the year before Brian goes missing and dead, killed. She comes across a larger SUV, and she makes a phone call, does the run, DMV, unfortunately those are all purged, but she remembers making a phone call to the wife of the owners, usually owned car, wife, husband, and she remembers having that conversation. Kathy Thomas, Brian Winchester's wife, remembers that conversation. Remembers Joni Chase saying, describing the bumper stickers. But that wasn't supposed to be there because Brian was supposed to be hunting. But he wasn't. Because he was there and done something with Denise. Just like he said. Just like Brian told him. We talked about this in openings and in jury selection. You are here because you are to use your common sense, experience, education, life skills And you use those tools throughout the course of your evaluation of all the situation here. Remember, affairs and conspiracies are secretive by their very nature. And they were good at it. They kept the secret of his murder for 17 years. 21 including the affair beforehand. 18 years now. So now we turn to what Brian Winchester's testimony is about the actual conspiracy. Again, keep it in mind about the previous accessory aspect, Dr. Mnookin's testimony, Kathy Thomas's testimony, all the things we just went over that corroborated all the other things that Brian Winchester said. And that's the light in which you should look at his testimony regarding the conspiracy. What did he tell you? Over a year they discussed it. That insurance was a motive, but it wasn't the sole motive. It was to be together as far as he was concerned. The plan evolved over the time period. At one point there was a conversation about whether we were going to kill both Kathy and Mike. A boating accident offshore where Denise and Brian were going to be clinging to a buoy. And Mike and Kathy are dead. He tells you that she has major concerns given her upbringing with being a divorcee. Didn't want to be a divorcee. Was concerned about custody of her child. Didn't want to share custody of her child. Balancing act between a divorcee or a widow. A widow with $1.75 million. The sympathy of the community because your husband's missing in a hunting accident. A lot better than a divorcee. And what did he tell you about the murder itself? Again, Brian Winchester's testimony corroborated. The waiters. The plan was to get him onto a boat, push him over, so he would drown in the waders because of the myth that if you go into the water with the waders, you're going to in fact drown. You can't escape. They drag you down. But the plan was to take him out on the Lake Seminole to the secret honey hole. But he had to put his waders on before he gets into the boat. And they head out. And he knows the depths in that area aren't real deep, so he's got to go to this particular 12-foot hole. Alton Renew told you about this 12-foot hole. And the search. And all the things and how everything's focused around that one particular area. When he gets to that area, he pushes them over. And somehow he's able to get out of those waders. And we know that's corroborated because Joe Sheffield, who's the man that found the waders 6 months later, he says whenever he found the waders, they were pulled halfway down. Inside out, down to the waist area. Howard Drew came in and said that I taught him how to get out of those waders. We practiced it in the pool. And the first thing you do is you get those straps off and you peel them down. And those waders were found in that 12-foot hole. Again, what he's telling you is corroborated. So he shot him. I'm not going to go into the details of how he shot him because it was brutal. Brian Winchester is not a good person. He's a murderer, just like he told you. But that doesn't mean his testimony isn't accurate. And we know, and it's corroborated, that he was in fact shot because he told us where the body is. We were able to recover the body, and we found the body, and he was in fact shot in the face, just like Brian Winchester told you. Brian Winchester tells you about the murder, that he pulled the shirt over his head because he didn't want to have to look at his friend's face. Again, that's how the body was found. You saw the medical examiner's photographs about that, her description of that. Again, robbery. And then he buried it. And he took him and he buried him in Car Lake. Following his confession to law enforcement, he took him to Car Lake and showed him where he was buried. And that's where he was found. Again, Brian Winchester's statements are corroborated. So what did he tell you? 3 years later, corroborated. Murder itself, corroborated. What does it say about the other parts? Certainly when you're balancing, weighing the evidence, if he's not lying about that, it's corroborated. What does it say about the rest of his testimony? Well, then you go one step farther. Motive. Follow the money. What an investigative department says. Homicide investigation. You look to the spouse. Follow the money. $1 million, $500,000, $250,000, $1.75 million. That she is the beneficiary of. Not Brian Winchester. She. And when you add all that up, each and every element of that conspiracy has been met. So now let's talk about the murder itself. How was she guilty of the murder? Mike Williams is dead. The death is caused by a criminal act, no question about it. Premeditation, no question about it. Definition, you already got it. Building your premeditation basically means you've actually thought about it beforehand. Sometimes it can be instantaneous. We know that's not here because this was a long thought out process to get him in the way to push him overboard. All the plans that went into this particular thing. No question, Mike Williams killed after Brian Winchester decided to do so. No question, he made it well before actually doing so. So, how does, again, Denise Williams figure into this? That's where the principle comes into play. If the defendant helped another person or persons commit the crime of first-degree murder, the defendant is a principal and must be treated as if she had done all the things the other person did. If she had a conscious intent that the crime be done, again, Brian Winchester tells you, all the stuff that he told you regarding what it is that they conspired to do beforehand. Did she have a conscious intent that he go on that hunting trip and die? And never come home again? And the answer, of course, is yes. Did she do an act, word, or other thing that encouraged, assisted Brian to commit the crime? Absolutely. To be a principal, the defendant does not have to be present when the crime was committed. That's the law. She is, in fact, a principal. And when you add it up, and you have a conspiracy for murder, and you have the murder that is actually committed, and you have a principle to that murder, that equals murder. And in the end, when you evaluate all that evidence, and you evaluate the corroborated testimony of Brian Winchester and what Denise Williams' involvement is in all of this, and you evaluate the recorded statement, the testimony of Dr. Mnookin, the testimony of all the people that corroborated, once again, Brian Winchester's statement, and when you take it all into account, I'm confident that you will in fact find her guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, first-degree murder, and accessory after the fact. Thank you.